A shadow cuts across the pill bottle as a small hand pulls back from it, trembling. The bottle sits in the center of the kitchen counter like it has claimed the room for itself, its amber plastic throwing distorted shapes across the white surface while the late morning light cuts a thin, sharp line directly through it. My daughter's breath snags in her throat, a soft, almost silent sound, but I hear it anyway because every part of me is tuned to her fear before she even lets it surface. I take one slow step toward her, careful not to make her flinch, careful not to make the shadow move in a way that might startle her further, and every inch of the room feels suspended in that thin slice of light. She keeps her eyes locked on the bottle, her tiny shoulders hunched, fingers curled tight against her palms, as if whatever is inside that container is far worse than anything I can understand in this moment. The air in the kitchen holds a strange stillness, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, of how the refrigerator hum becomes a warning instead of background noise. I reach out and my hand crosses the beam of light, breaking the shape on the counter, and she lets out a tiny gasp like I've just dragged something dangerous closer to her. I freeze not because I believe the bottle can harm me simply by being touched, but because of the way she recoils. Her eyes widen wet at the corners, and her lips part as though she's trying to form words she can't bring herself to say. The pill bottle hasn't moved. It hasn't made a sound, hasn't signaled any threat yet. She stares at it as if it has betrayed her personally. I rest my palm flat against the counter to show her I'm staying put, letting her see that I'm not grabbing it, not shaking it, not opening it. She watches every millimeter of my movement, as if memorizing it, as if bracing for something, and I catch the sharp glint of the cut light line splitting the bottle's silhouette in half. Her shoulders twitch. My chest tightens. Something in her silence feels louder than a scream, a warning I'm not prepared to hear. I try to steady my breath, but the strange tension wrapping itself around this moment makes everything inside me tighten. My daughter has never been dramatic, never been the type to fear something without reason, and the tremor in her hand isn't the kind that comes from a sudden startle. It's the slow, terrified kind, the kind that comes from anticipating hurt. A thin sheen of sweat gathers at the nape of her neck, and she swallows hard, the motion visible in her throat. Her gaze darts from the bottle to me and back again, and even though she doesn't speak, her eyes say, "Everything. Don't touch it. Don't make me touch it. Don't bring it near me." I step backward half an inch, giving her space, letting her know I'm not going to force anything. The light shifts slightly as a cloud passes outside, and the shadow stretching from the bottle grows longer, darker, stretching across the counter toward her feet. She notices it before I do, and she shuffles one step back, then another, her breath catching again, as if the darkness itself is something she recognizes. I try to coax out a word, a whisper, anything, but she only shakes her head, small and quick, a refusal more instinctive than conscious. The room tightens around us. The smell of disinfectant lingering from last night's cleaning suddenly stings my nose, and the faint clatter of a passing car on the street sounds like it's outside the window, too close, too sharp. I move my hand slightly, just enough to test the air, and the bottle's shadow shifts again this time, stretching in a distorted bend that makes my daughter's knees nearly buckle. I take that in with a jolt, because children sense things adults try to explain away, and her fear is not random. Something happened earlier, something she hasn't said, something connected to this bottle, to the pills inside, to the way she looks at it like it holds a threat I can't see yet. I whisper her name, but she only presses a fist against her mouth, eyes shaking, breath trembling. I know better than to push. I know better than to demand answers when fear has taken her voice hostage. The shadow from the bottle grows softer, then harsher, as the cloud moves again, the kitchen dimming and brightening in alternating pulses, and my daughter reacts to each shift as if the light itself is revealing something she's desperate to avoid. My pulse throbs in my neck, heavy, insistent, warning me that this is not normal, that her reaction is too deep, too instinctive to dismiss. I still haven't touched the bottle. I don't want to not with her watching like this, not with whatever memory is clinging to her expression. This moment feels like the edge of something breaking, and I can't tell which of us will shatter first. Her eyes flick once more to the bottle, then to me, and then she backs away toward the doorway with a tiny whimper leaking through her closed lips. The bottle stays motionless on the counter, yet its shadow reaches farther than it should as the last shift of light makes it stretch toward her retreating feet. The shadow crawls closer as she whispers a single terrified breath. I'm Emily Hart, 34, a nurse from Portland, Oregon. That morning had seemed harmless in the way ordinary days often felt before life revealed the cracks hiding beneath them. The sun filtered through the kitchen window in a thin, cool stream as I packed my daughter's small lunchbox, humming under my breath while she dragged her feet through the hallway. I clipped my ID badge to my belt, and the trembling key attached to it gave a faint metallic rattle, a sound I'd heard countless times but somehow registered differently that morning, sharper, more intrusive. She hovered near the counter, hesitant, her small fingers tracing the pattern on her sleeve without looking up. When I asked if she slept well, she nodded too quickly, avoiding my eyes, and the motion tugged at something inside me I didn't understand yet. As I passed by the sink, a thin glass reflection flickered across the window, the motif appearing for the first time like a quiet warning I was still too distracted to interpret. I dismissed the moment and turned toward her with a forced cheerfulness that felt almost like I was trying to convince myself. She barely reacted, only shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her shoulders drawn up as if bracing against something she couldn't articulate. I knelt to tie her shoes, and she flinched when my hand brushed her ankle. A tiny recoil, barely a whisper of movement, but it sent a faint chill down my spine. "Are you okay?" I'd asked, keeping my voice soft and steady. She swallowed, nodded again, and tucked her chin down. I didn't push. I should have. Looking back, I should have paid attention to the way her breathing quickened whenever I mentioned seeing Aunt Marlene later that afternoon. At the time, though, I told myself she was just tired, maybe grumpy or overwhelmed by school. Children had moods. They had their moments. I had no reason, no logical, grounded reason to think she was afraid of something as ordinary as a bottle of pills supposedly meant to help her. As we drove, she watched the passing houses with a hollow stare, her feet tapping lightly against the seat. I reached for the radio, but she shook her head before I even touched the dial, another small sign I ignored because it didn't fit any pattern I recognized. When we arrived at Marlene's house, the tension thickened. My daughter's hand tightened around mine, her fingers cool and slightly damp, and I felt the shift in her body language instantly. Marlene appeared in the doorway with her usual refined calm, offering a practiced smile that seemed too still around the edges. She complimented my daughter's dress, leaned forward to kiss her cheek, and my daughter took a step back so subtle it barely registered, barely, but not quite unseen. The house smelled faintly of lavender as it always did, but beneath it lingered something else, something metallic, bitter, almost medicinal. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was being overly sensitive because I was tired from a long shift at the hospital. Marlene ushered us in with the same smooth gestures she always used, her movements deliberate, measured, as if she rehearsed each expression. She mentioned having a few supplements that might give extra energy, and I responded automatically, nodding, thinking about vitamins, harmless boosts, nothing serious. My daughter's grip tightened harder. I should have noticed. Sometimes the most terrifying danger hides behind familiar smiles, waiting until you're too comfortable to see the truth. Marlene chatted about the weather, the neighborhood, the errands she had planned, anything except my daughter's well-being. I forced myself to focus, but my mind kept drifting to the way my daughter's eyes darted to the hallway each time Marlene moved. Something wasn't right, but I lacked the context, the evidence, the clarity to know what questions to ask. At one point, Marlene set a small box on the dining table and slid it closer to me with her manicured fingers. I saw my daughter flinch again, her shoulders rising like a small wave about to break. I asked Marlene what was inside, and she said, "Just some things I've been meaning to go through," with that same smooth tone that offered no foothold for suspicion. When I stepped outside for a moment to take a call from the clinic about shift coverage, the air felt strangely too cold for the time of day. I told the nurse I'd be in later and hung up quickly, uneasy with being even a few feet away from my daughter. When I returned inside, I found Marlene standing beside the counter with her back turned and my daughter sitting stiffly on the stool, her small hands clasped around each other. She refused to look in my direction as though ashamed of something or terrified of my reaction. I felt a quiet pressure forming beneath my ribs, a tightness not unlike the early signs of panic I'd seen in patients, but rarely in myself. Still, I forced normalcy. I told myself I was imagining things, that my daughter was simply tired or overwhelmed. Children were unpredictable. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they shut down. But as we prepared to leave and Marlene leaned in for a hug, my daughter jerked away with a suddenness she couldn't hide, her breath catching in her throat. Marlene's expression twitched, only for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. The irritation she tried to bury the flash of something colder behind her polite demeanor. It disappeared as quickly as it came, masked by an overly sweet laugh. I told myself everything was fine, but deep down, a knot tightened. I should have listened to that knot. I should have recognized that something had already gone very, very wrong long before the pill bottle ever hit my kitchen counter. The truth had been moving toward us, quietly building in the shadows we ignored. Her fear followed us home long before the pills ever did. I kept replaying the car ride home in my mind as I set a glass of water beside my daughter that afternoon, the sunlight catching on its surface and throwing a glass reflection across the table like a thin blade of light pointing directly at her. She refused to touch the glass, her eyes avoiding it the same way she avoided the counter where the pill bottle sat sealed and untouched. Her shoulders were tense again, pulled tight, as if she expected something awful to happen the moment she looked away. I tried to coax her into drinking, but her lip trembled, and she shook her head with such quiet desperation that the breath caught in my throat. At the time, I told myself she was overwhelmed, still shaken from the visit with Marlene, but the truth was already creeping into the edges of the room in subtle ways I didn't yet understand. The air smelled faintly sterile, as if the house had been scrubbed too hard earlier, though I hadn't cleaned a thing that morning. I caught another sliver of reflected light shifting across the water, splitting in two for a second, before merging again, and for a moment I felt like that reflection mirrored my own uncertainty, fractured and unclear, but undeniably present. I didn't push her to drink. I simply set the glass aside and tried to focus on normal things, like unpacking her backpack and sorting through the papers she'd brought home from school. She hovered near the doorway, leaning against the frame, like she needed something solid to keep her upright. When the phone rang, I recognized Dr. Keller's number, and a subtle unease tightened beneath my ribs. I answered, expecting a routine follow-up about scheduling or vaccinations, but instead, his voice carried an edge of formality that made my pulse shift. He explained that he had checked something after our brief encounter earlier, something about the pills Marlene had mentioned, and he wanted to go over a detail that didn't sit right. I glanced at my daughter, who was staring at the floor as if willing herself to disappear, and told him I could talk privately in a moment. I stepped into the hallway, closing the door gently behind me, though the separation made my stomach twist. Keller spoke in that calm, clinical tone that never gave anything away, but the words landed harder with each sentence. He told me he accessed a digital medical record associated with the supplement code Marlene had provided. The snippet he found, Refresh RX14B, time 0817, didn't match what she claimed. The timing alone contradicted her explanation, suggesting the pills were neither newly recommended nor logged the way she had insisted. It was small technical, but it cracked the first real line through the false sense of safety I had tried to maintain. Evidence number 1. Even if I didn't yet understand what it meant, the contradiction was undeniable. I remember standing in the hallway, gripping the phone tighter than necessary, listening, as Keller explained the discrepancy with steady patience. He didn't accuse Marlene of lying. He simply pointed out that something didn't align. He asked if I had the bottle with me and suggested bringing it back for closer examination. I swallowed hard, told him yes, and promised to return soon. When I walked back into the room, the shift in atmosphere felt immediate and heavy, like stepping into a dim theater where everyone waits for the next terrible reveal. My daughter looked up at me with wide, searching eyes, as if she could read the tension on my face before I said a word. "We have to go back to the clinic," I told her gently. She stiffened instantly. I hated the panic that washed across her features, the way her tiny hands curled into fists she tried to hide behind her back. I didn't understand what memory those pills sparked in her, what fear took root inside her chest, but I could feel it pulsing through the room like an electric current. I picked up the pill bottle with deliberate caution, careful not to shake it, careful not to let her see my own discomfort. Her eyes locked on it immediately, and she exhaled a trembling breath. A tiny sound of dread so small I almost missed it. "You're okay," I whispered, though the words felt fragile even to me. "We're just going to have someone look at these." She pressed her back to the wall, her breath quickening, tears swelling at the edges of her eyes. Her reaction wasn't confusion, it was recognition, the kind that comes from fear, learned the hard way. I moved slowly toward her, set the bottle on the opposite counter, and crouched down to her level. "Did something happen earlier?" I asked quietly. She shook her head fast, too fast, the kind of denial that screams more truth than admission. She wiped her cheeks and whispered, "Don't let her touch me again," and the words were so soft I almost questioned whether I heard them at all. But the look on her face told me they were real. My heart clenched tightly, my breath caught, and the house suddenly felt too small, too dim, too heavy with unanswered questions. I knew then that Keller's contradiction wasn't just a clerical error, it was the first loose thread in something much darker. The truth didn't feel distant anymore. It felt like it was beginning to take shape right in front of us. I gathered her into my arms and held her close for a long moment before we headed for the door. As I switched off the kitchen light, the reflection on the glass of water glimmered one last time, splitting again in a way that made my stomach twist. Something was wrong. Something had happened long before I understood it, and whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. Her fear didn't fade. It sharpened when I picked up the bottle again. The clinic hallway had always smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled air, but that afternoon the scent felt sharper, almost metallic, clinging to the back of my throat as I walked in with my daughter's small hand tucked against my side. The fluorescent ceiling lights hummed with an uneven flicker, casting patches of pale illumination along the polished floor. Patients sat scattered across the benches, mothers with restless toddlers, an older man rubbing his temples, a teenage boy tapping his foot against the leg of a chair, and their quiet movements created a restless tension in the space that made me feel as though all of them were unconsciously bracing for something. I kept my daughter close, my fingers brushing her shoulder every few seconds so she knew I was there. She hadn't spoken a word since we left the house. The air felt thick between us, as if every breath carried unsaid truths neither of us was ready to face. When Dr. Keller stepped out from behind the triage desk, his gaze went straight to the pill bottle in my hand. The controlled neutrality on his face was the kind doctors used when they were preparing to deliver news that required caution. He gestured toward a smaller assessment room to the right, the one usually reserved for quiet conversations or sudden developments. As we stepped inside, the half-open drawer in the corner immediately caught my attention. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of cold metal instruments inside, just enough to feel wrong, like something forgotten or abandoned mid-action. That suspended drawer mirrored the same uneasy tension that had been running through the day, a subtle signal that something about this situation was not aligned the way it should be. Keller noticed the direction of my gaze but didn't comment. Instead, he pulled a small tablet from his coat pocket and tapped the screen. "I need to show you something," he said calmly, turning the display toward me. My daughter pressed herself against my hip, her breath shaking. A mother sitting outside paused mid-sentence, glancing toward our open doorway as Keller adjusted the volume. The tablet emitted a faint crackle of audio static, a shuffle of movement, then a clipped sequence of sounds that made the skin along my arms prickle. Keller spoke quietly. "This is from the clinic's intake hallway earlier today. Audio clip AC52, timestamp 0903. The significance of the timestamp hit me like a slow drip of ice. It was the exact time Marlene had sworn she wasn't anywhere near us, the time she claimed she was home preparing for errands. The audio played again, this time sharper, and I could hear a woman's voice, soft, controlled, unmistakably, Marlene saying something unintelligible in that clipped, smooth tone she always used when she wanted to sound harmless. A rustle followed the faint sound of a bottle cap clicking shut, and then a soft gasp that didn't sound like an adult at all. My daughter's breath hitched violently. Her fingers dug into my arm nails, scraping lightly through the sleeve of my jacket. Keller watched her reaction with careful attention, his eyebrows tightening almost imperceptibly. "She shouldn't have been here," he said quietly, not based on what she claimed, not based on the times she gave. Outside the doorway, movement slowed. A woman with a stroller turned her head slightly, as if trying to catch part of the conversation. The teenage boy stopped tapping his foot. The hallway seemed to hold its breath around us. I swallowed hard. Could that audio be mistimed or mislabeled? The question felt weak even as I asked it, but I needed some thread, any thread that might pull the situation back into something less horrifying. Keller shook his head. "The system timestamps automatically. There's no manual entry option." My daughter pressed her forehead against my hip, shaking her head repeatedly, almost in a silent plea for me not to ask more. But I had to. "Is that her?" I whispered. Keller didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "What did your sister-in-law tell you about these pills?" The answer came out brittle. She said they were harmless supplements. He lifted the bottle from my hand with sterile caution, turning it under the light. The liquid shadow cast by the amber plastic grew longer across the table, stretching toward the half-open drawer like it wanted to sink into the tools inside. My daughter flinched. There are moments in life when fear stops being abstract and becomes something you can feel with your hands, something that breathes beside you, something that looks back at you through your child's eyes. Keller uncapped the bottle, but didn't open it fully, only enough to glance inside. "I'll need to run the contents through panel testing," he said quietly. "The record you mentioned earlier, Refresh RX-14B, doesn't match the description she gave. And now this audio clip..." He let the implication hang. He didn't need to finish it. The truth was already clawing its way into shape. My daughter suddenly hid her face against my side, shaking violently. Her small voice cracked through the silence. "I don't want her near me again," she whispered. The words were so fragile, so drenched in terror, that the mother outside the doorway physically stiffened, turning fully toward us now. Someone near the triage desk murmured, wondering aloud what was going on. The public nature of the moment finally hit me. People were watching, listening. The tension was no longer private. Keller stepped back, glancing at the half-open drawer again, as if reassessing the room's configuration, the security of it, the vulnerability of both of us standing inside it. "Emily," he said carefully, "you need to tell me exactly what happened before you came here." But before I could answer, the pill bottle slipped slightly in his hand, tapping against the metal counter, and producing a sharp sound that sent my daughter recoiling into the corner. Her breath exploding in a tiny broken cry that echoed across the hallway. Everything stopped. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Her fear didn't need explanation anymore. It spoke for itself with a clarity that shook every person watching. Keller steadied the bottle, his jaw tightening. He met my eyes with a seriousness that stripped away any pretense of calm. "We're not done," he said quietly. "Not even close." My daughter trembled harder when Keller asked what Marlene really gave her. The drive home felt longer than it should have, each passing intersection stretching out like an unfinished sentence, and by the time I carried my daughter through the front door, my nerves had thinned into something brittle. The hallway bulb flickered as we stepped inside, 3 sharp blinks, a brief glow, then a dim fade that cast the house into a half-dark state that made everything look slightly wrong. My daughter clung to my sleeve, her breath small and shuddering. I guided her toward the living room, murmuring soft reassurances, though the words sounded hollow even to me. The bulb continued flickering behind us, its uneven rhythm tapping against my spine like a warning I didn't yet know how to interpret. I tried to settle her on the couch with a blanket and a warm drink, but she kept her gaze fixed on the hallway, where the bulb sputtered, her fingers gripping the fabric like she expected someone to step out of the shadows at any moment. I forced myself to turn away from the light and focus on her backpack, placing it on the table. Something inside weighed more than it should have. When I unzipped it, a small folded note slipped out and drifted onto the table with a whisper-soft sound. I picked it up immediately, noticing the smear of faded ink across the top edge. The paper felt worn, handled too many times. Evidence number 3. The handwriting listed a dosage, 4.5 milligauss, but the stroke of the numerals looked blurred, as if someone had tried to erase and rewrite it. The smudged section made my stomach tighten. It didn't match the harmless vitamins Marlene claimed to have given her. The pill bottle ingredients listed no dosage like this. This was for something else entirely, something prescribed, something stronger. My breath hitched. My hands began shaking before I could stop them. My daughter watched me carefully, her lower lip trembling. "Did she give you something else?" I asked gently, but the question made her shrink into the cushions, as if the memory pinched her from the inside. She didn't answer. She just tucked her hands under her legs, curling inward, staring at the floor. There is a specific terror in realizing danger entered your home through a person you trusted, and that you handed them the opportunity yourself. I swallowed hard and set the note aside, but the faded ink stared back up at me like a quiet confession someone hoped would stay buried. I checked her backpack again and found nothing else. No wrapper, no leaflet, no container. If Marlene slipped the pills into her bag before we arrived or after we left the room, I couldn't be sure. But someone placed that note there intentionally. Someone wanted her to take something. The bulb flickered again, brighter this time, then dipped back into a dull glow. The pulse of light made the smudged ink shimmer slightly on the page, like it was trying to reveal the words beneath. I scanned the rest of the note and found an instruction line, half erased. "Take once D." The rest was gone, smeared out entirely. Daily. During meals. Don't mix with... Each possibility twisted my insides tighter. I reached for my phone, debating whether to call Keller again, but my daughter made a tiny, fragile sound that froze my hand midair, a soft whimper barely audible as she curled deeper into the couch. Her eyes were red around the edges, not from crying recently, but from crying earlier at the aunt's house, long before I realized something had happened. She shouldn't have had to hold that fear alone. I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She flinched, not from my touch, but from the bulb flickering overhead again. "Did something happen at Aunt Marlene's?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She pressed her lips together and gave a tiny nod. My heart plummeted. "Can you tell me?" She shook her head violently, tears slipping out instantly. "It's okay," I whispered, drawing her close. "You don't have to talk yet." She buried her face in my chest, and I felt the trembling in her shoulders seep into my own body like a cold tide. The bulb flickered again, one long blink, then steadied for a few seconds before dimming. The shadows spread further along the hallway walls. I couldn't shake the sense that the house itself was responding to her fear. When Eric came home, the energy in the room shifted, thickened. He set his keys on the counter and walked toward us with a cautious frown. "What happened?" he asked, lowering his voice when he saw our daughter bundled against me. I hesitated. Explaining it out loud made everything feel more real, more dangerous. I showed him the faded ink note. He scanned it with raised brows, shaking his head. "This doesn't mean anything," he said. "Maybe it's old. Maybe it's something she wrote down before what I snapped." He blinked, startled. "Emily, I'm just saying we shouldn't jump to conclusions." The flickering bulb chose that exact moment to buzz loudly overhead, the light pulsing in a harsh, strobe-like rhythm that made my daughter cover her ears. My pulse spiked. "She's terrified," I whispered fiercely. "Look at her." Eric glanced at her but didn't seem to grasp the depth of her fear. "Marlene would never hurt her. You know that." "I don't know anything right now," I said, my voice low, trembling with controlled anger. "What I do know is that this note was in her backpack, and it doesn't match anything Marlene claimed." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Let's just slow down." "No," I said. "We don't get to slow down." The shadows cast by the flickering bulb stretched across the walls like reaching fingers distorting the edges of the room. The faded ink on the note seemed darker now, the smudges thicker, revealing hints of letters beneath. My daughter lifted her head slightly, eyes haunted. "Don't make me take it," she whispered into my shirt. The words scraped through me like broken glass. My throat tightened. I held her closer, feeling the small tremors running through her body. Her fear wasn't vague anymore. It was tied to something specific she remembered, and I still didn't know. The bulb flickered again, fluttering weakly. I pressed the note flat against the table, staring at the smeared dosage, the half-erased instruction, the undeniable wrongness of it all. "I'm taking her back to Keller," I said. "Tonight." Eric started to protest, but one look at my face silenced him. The bulb blinked once more and went dark for a full second before sputtering back to life. Shadows crawled across the walls. I grabbed the bottle, the note, my keys. My daughter grabbed my hand with desperate urgency, as if afraid the darkness itself might reach for her if she let go. The ink smear hid something I needed to see before it was too late. I placed the pill bottle, the faded ink note, and my phone side by side on the kitchen table, arranging them with a precision that felt almost surgical, as if the order of the objects could force clarity into the chaos inside my head. The last of the evening light filtered through the blinds, striking the metal rim of a mixing bowl on the counter and stretching a long metallic shadow across the table toward me. That shadow felt wrong, too sharp, too deliberate, mirroring the tension humming beneath my skin as I tried to reconstruct every moment from the day. My daughter sat at the far end of the table, curled into the corner of the chair, her small feet pulled up, her eyes darting from the bottle to the note like she expected one of them to move. I watched her carefully, noticing the subtle tremble in her hand each time she brushed her hair behind her ear. It wasn't the usual restless fidgeting of a child. It was something deeper, something that trembled from the memory of fear. I leaned closer, lowering my voice into the calm tone I used with anxious patience. "Can you tell me what happened before I picked you up?" She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze flicked sharply to the pill bottle, the same eye flick I had seen earlier, a tiny involuntary movement that shouldn't have happened if she were simply confused. Evidence number 4, a contradiction she couldn't control even if she wanted to. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "why does that bottle scare you?" She clamped her hands together so tightly her knuckles whitened. The metallic shadow shifted slightly with the deepening dusk curving along the table, like something inching closer, and she noticed it too, shrinking back as if it were alive. Something inside me fractured. I reached for the bottle, not to open it, but to move it farther away, and her reaction struck like a physical blow. Her hand trembled violently, her breath hitched, and her pupils widened with a terror that wasn't new. It was remembered. The reflection splits as her hand trembles. I whispered under my breath, recognizing the line not as poetry, but as a realization, an echo of something I'd seen earlier when the light had split across her water glass. A pattern, a fear that existed before the moment in our kitchen. My daughter pressed a fist to her mouth, shaking her head rapidly as though trying to push away the memory or the image forming in her mind. "Did someone else give you something before I came in?" I asked gently. She hesitated for too long, far too long, and my pulse hammered with dread. Children don't hold back the truth unless telling it feels more dangerous than keeping it inside. I pulled the note closer, staring at the smeared dosage, the uneven ink strokes, and the partial instruction that looked more sinister now than ever. The metallic shadow stretched further as the light thinned, touching the corner of the note, and my daughter recoiled again at the mere sight of the shifting darkness. "Did she try to make you take something?" I pressed quietly. Another eye flick. Another tremble. Not random, not ambiguous. Evidence number 4 carved itself deeper into the situation, tracing a clear contradiction between what Marlene claimed and what had actually occurred. She said it would help me. My daughter finally whispered, her voice so faint I almost didn't catch it. But it hurt. The words knocked the air from my lungs. Hurt how? Her breath hitched. My tongue. burned. And she told me not to tell you. A cold, suffocating pressure wrapped around my chest. The metallic shadow seemed to thicken, darkening the table between us, as though the room itself reacted to her words. My mind flashed back to Marlene's perfect smile, the way she'd folded her hands so elegantly, the way her voice had hovered between soothing and manipulative. I remembered her leaning toward my daughter, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear with those polished fingers, murmuring something I hadn't caught. My stomach turned. "Did you swallow anything?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. A tear slipped down her cheek. She nodded once, small, tight, terrified. My heart plummeted. "How much? Just a little," she whispered. She pressed her hands against her chest as if remembering the sensation. She said it was candy, but it wasn't. Every muscle in my body tightened. "She told you it was candy." Another nod, another tremor. I felt the room tilt slightly, the metallic shadow bending across the table in a twisted arc. The evidence wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was direct. It was behavioral. It was breaking through my daughter's fear in fragments that pieced together a truth I should have seen sooner. The moment a child learns fear from someone meant to protect them is a betrayal that never leaves their bones. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the earlier message from Keller, the timestamp of the medical note, the audio clip, the contradictions. All of it had been pointing to this moment. "Sweetheart, did she give you something before you saw me in the kitchen?" Her breath stuttered. Before and after. After. A cold wave surged through me, chilling every thought. She hadn't just tried once, she had tried twice. The metallic shadow seemed to pulse along the table as if echoing the urgency tightening inside me. I stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "Get your shoes," I said softly but firmly. "We're going back to Dr. Keller. Right now." My daughter didn't question it. She slid off the chair legs, shaky, and grabbed my hand as though it were the only solid thing left in the world. I flicked on the overhead light, but it barely dented the creeping shadow that lined the walls. The note lay on the table, its faded ink blurring into the deepening dusk, the metallic shadow curling along its edge like a signature of something darker we were finally beginning to uncover. As we walked out the door, I realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just about pills. This was about deliberate manipulation, concealed harm, and a child's terror carefully crafted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Her trembling confession revealed far more danger than I'd feared. The sky had already darkened into a heavy slate gray when we reached the house again, the air thick with the smell of oncoming rain. And by the time I guided my daughter up the steps, a cold drizzle had started to fall, brushing against our jackets in sharp, needling taps. I had barely closed the front door when a sudden knock startled us both, the sound crisp and urgent. I opened it to find Amanda, our neighbor, her hair damp and sticking to her cheeks, a rain-wet coat sleeve clinging to her arm as she held her phone tightly in her other hand. Her chest rose and fell in quick breaths as if she had run across the yard without stopping. "Emily," she said, voice low but firm, "I need to show you something. Right now." Her tone made my pulse kick up instantly. I stepped aside, urging her in, and she swept into the living room, brushing stray droplets of rain from her sleeve. My daughter instinctively pressed closer to me, her small body trembling with a recognition I still didn't understand fully. "This was taken this morning," Amanda said, unlocking her phone with stiff fingers. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but after I heard the way she talked to you earlier, well, I thought you should see." She opened a video file labeled L77 Duration 12s, and the moment the screen lit up, I felt a cold pulse run through my chest. Evidence number 5. A witness camera. The second public scene. The video began with a shaky start, the camera angled toward the sidewalk by chance as Amanda recorded her dog playing in the grass across the yard. But then the frame shifted. Marlene's figure entered from the left, sharp, composed moving, with a deliberate calm that made my stomach twist. The smoothness of her expression didn't match the hurried pace of her steps. The camera caught her glancing around once, twice checking for witnesses before stopping beside my daughter's backpack, which sat unattended on the porch chair for less than 30 seconds, while I'd stepped back inside earlier. Amanda must have recorded this without realizing what she'd captured. Her dog barked in the background, the leash tugging at the frame. Marlene's hand moved swiftly, almost mechanically, as she unzipped the bag just halfway. My daughter sucked in a tiny gasp beside me. She recognized the moment instantly. Amanda paused, the video hand trembling slightly. "That's not all," she said, swallowing. She hit play again. Marlene slipped something inside the front pocket, small, dark, cylindrical. A pill bottle. A tube, I couldn't tell. After placing it inside, she zipped the bag shut with precise care and glanced over her shoulder before smoothing her hair. Her expression was controlled, almost serene. Too serene. Then she walked away, calm as ever, leaving the frame just as the video cut off. My heart pounded each beat, striking like a warning bell. My daughter covered her mouth, her breath sharp and broken. She put something in my bag, she whispered, voice cracking. Her eyes filled with terror and recognition, confirming what I had begun fearing since part 3. There had been more than one opportunity for Marlene to interfere, more than one moment when my daughter had been at her mercy. Amanda exhaled shakily. "I didn't know," she said, stepping back. "I didn't know any of this was serious. But after hearing your daughter scream earlier at the clinic, I thought this might matter." Her sincerity was genuine, her nerves palpable. I nodded, though my own hands were trembling. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You did the right thing." But even as I spoke, the weight of the truth pressed harder against my ribs. Marlene hadn't been careless. She had been careful, intentional. There is a kind of cruelty that hides behind gentleness, the kind that waits for the perfect moment to strike where no one notices. My daughter tugged at my sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. "She told me not to tell. She said it would make you mad." The words punched the air from my lungs. "I would never be mad at you," I said quickly, dropping to my knees beside her. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing." She collapsed into my arms, shaking, and I held her so tightly I could feel her heartbeat pounding against my chest. Amanda looked away, giving us privacy for a few seconds, though her expression remained tense and unsettled. Eric stepped into the living room at that exact moment, pausing as he saw Amanda, the phone, the expression on my face. "What's going on?" he asked, voice thinning with unease. I handed him the phone with a steady hand I did not feel. He watched the 12-second video without blinking, his jaw tightening, his throat working as he swallowed hard. But then, like always, he tried to rationalize it. This could be anything, he said, though the tone was less certain now. Maybe she was just checking something. Maybe she dropped something inside. "Stop," I said sharply. "Look at her face. Look at the way she checks the street. Look at the object in her hand." He hesitated. The image had cracked his trust, but it hadn't shattered it yet. Not like mine. My daughter sobbed harder, pressing her face into my shoulder. Amanda stepped back toward the door, raindrops still clinging to her coat sleeve. "If you need anything at all, text me," she said softly. "I'm so sorry, Emily." When she left, the rain hammered harder against the windows, creating a rhythm that felt too close, too loud, too suffocating. I turned to Eric again, but this time my voice came out colder, steadier, carved from something newly certain. "She lied," I said. "She manipulated us, and she hurt our daughter." The silence that followed was the heaviest of the entire day. Some truths don't explode. They settle like cold ash, smothering every excuse in their path. I stood grabbing the pill bottle, the note, and Amanda's video file. The rain-wet sleeve image lingered in my mind like a watermark on the truth. "We're taking this to Keller," I said. "Now." My daughter reached for my hand again, this time not just out of fear but out of trust. The video showed her lying. What it didn't show scared me more. By the time we reached the clinic's back lot, the rain had eased into a thin mist that clung to the air like a second skin, and the street lamps flickered against the wet pavement in long streaks of amber light. I parked near the emergency entrance, my thoughts tightening around every detail we had gathered Amanda's video, the faded ink note, the trembling in my daughter's hands, and yet it still felt like there was a missing piece, something just beyond reach. As I lifted her from the car seat, she clung to me, tucking her head beneath my chin, as though the world outside the vehicle felt colder than anything she'd felt earlier. A man with a cigarette stood near the ambulance bay, flicking ash to the ground in soft spirals. One cigarette ash fall drifted in the humid air for a moment before settling onto the pavement, and something about its slow, inevitable descent made my stomach twist with dread. Inside the clinic, Keller met us in the corridor leading to the diagnostics wing, his expression pulled into a tight line. "I reviewed the audio again," he said quietly, "and I asked the clinic to run a quick sweep for any inconsistencies in the registration logs." He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before handing it to me. "There's something you need to see." My pulse quickened. On the screen was a timeline screenshot, Ref T92. The clinic's entry log for the morning time-stamped locked verifiable showed a name highlighted at 0814, 3 minutes before the RX-14B mention. But it wasn't my daughter's name, and it wasn't mine. It was Marlene's. My breath caught. She said she wasn't here. Keller nodded grimly. She wasn't supposed to be. She told you she was home prepping for errands. But the system logs her in at 0814, requesting a medication inquiry. She left at 0821, a 7-minute window. My skin prickled. "She came here before we arrived," I whispered, "before I even picked my daughter up." The timeline discrepancy hit me like a blow. All morning she had positioned herself as a bystander, helpful, available, calm. But she had been here early. She had asked someone about medication. And she had left without telling me anything. The cigarette ash outside replayed in my mind, falling slowly, quietly, inevitably, just like the truth sliding into place. My daughter tugged at my sleeve, her breath quickening. "Mom." That's when she told me to close my eyes. I froze. Keller's head whipped toward her. "Close your eyes," he repeated gently. She swallowed, nodding. She said it would be quick. She said she needed to check something. My heart hammered. "Did she put something in your mouth then?" She shook her head, eyes darting away, then flicking back that same involuntary motion I had seen before. Another contradiction, another unintentional truth. She whispered. She touched my cheek, and something tasted bad after. A memory struck me. The faint powder residue on the rim of the bottle, the faded ink on the dosage note, the sudden panic in her eyes whenever I approached the bottle. And now Marlene had been here earlier without explanation. Some truths don't reveal themselves in one moment. They break open all at once, leaving you breathless in their aftermath. Keller exhaled shakily. "Emily, this means she likely knew the medication's effects before you even arrived." My daughter pressed closer to me, trembling harder. Keller turned the phone back toward himself and swiped to another image. This one made my stomach lurch. A security camera still from the clinic's parking lot, blurry but unmistakable, showed Marlene standing beside the passenger side of my parked car earlier that morning. The timestamp, 0820, 1 minute before she left the building. "This doesn't make sense," Eric muttered beside me, though his voice had thinned into something closer to disbelief than denial. "Why would she go near your car?" Keller answered before I could. "Because she didn't want to be seen interacting with the child inside the building. But outside, a different story." My pulse roared in my ears. "She never said she was here," I whispered. "Not once." "Exactly," Keller said. "That omission is intentional." The major reversal clicked into place, and the weight of it threatened to collapse my knees. She hadn't been reacting. She had been preparing. My daughter suddenly covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "She said I had to be brave," she choked out. "She said it wasn't supposed to taste that bad." A cold tremor ripped through me. Eric stepped back, color draining from his face. She had access," he murmured. "She had time. And motive." I said the words like ice. "She wanted to be alone with her. Twice." Keller tapped the T92 screenshot again. "This timestamp proves she lied about her entire morning. She didn't stumble into a mistake. She made choices." The clinic corridor seemed to tighten, the walls closing in as the truth finally took shape, clear, sharp, horrifying. The ash outside, the faded ink, the tremors, the audio, the pill bottle shadow. Every detail aligned with one cold conclusion: this wasn't clumsiness or confusion. It was deliberate. My daughter pressed her forehead to my chest and whispered, "Don't let her touch me again." And in that moment, I understood the real reversal, not what Marlene did, but how carefully she had constructed the lie around it. When someone's deception is built with precision, the collapse of it comes like a knife to the spine, silent, sudden, irreversible. Keller placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Emily, we have enough to escalate this, but we need every piece of evidence. Everything." I nodded, gripping my daughter tightly. Outside, another cigarette ash drifted down slow and weightless, settling into the growing storm. The timeline proved she lied. Now we needed proof of what she did. The house felt colder than the clinic when we returned, as if the truth we carried with us seeped into the walls and drained the warmth from every corner. I guided my daughter inside and settled her in her room with a nightlight and a soft blanket, promising I would stay close. When I stepped back into the hallway, the dim glow from her door cast a pale beam that landed on something glinting near the baseboard. I bent down and picked it up, a thin mirror shard, small enough to fit between my fingertips, its edges sharp and uneven. I didn't remember anything breaking earlier, but when I tilted it toward the hall light, it reflected my eye in a fractured sliver, splitting my own expression down the center. The image felt too symbolic, too on the nose for the night we were having, but the weight in my stomach told me it mattered anyway, even if I didn't yet know why. Eric emerged from the kitchen, rubbing his forehead. "I'm trying to process all this," he said, voice low and fraying. "It doesn't make any sense." "It does," I whispered, closing my fingers around the shard. "You just don't want it to." He flinched, not from the words, but from the truth buried inside them. I walked to the table and spread out everything we'd gathered. Amanda's video paused at the exact frame Marlene slipped something into the backpack: the faded ink note, the audio transcript Keller sent, and the T92 screenshot. When placed together, the evidence formed a chilling map of intention. But something still felt missing, a connecting thread that would tighten the entire picture into one undeniable conclusion. My phone buzzed on the table, a notification from the bank. I frowned and swiped it open. A digital scan was attached, flagged automatically as suspicious Ref B30. A bank slip. A purchase made at 7:52 a.m. By Marlene, charged to her account, but the destination listed was a pharmacy 2 towns over. A pharmacy that handled restricted medications. A pharmacy I recognized from my ER shifts because it supplied several controlled substances. My pulse quickened. I clicked the slip open fully. There, in faded blue text, was a transaction for a specialized compound. No description, no brand name, just a coded abbreviation, and a price much higher than any supplement would justify. Evidence number 7, the final cornering truth. Eric leaned over my shoulder as I zoomed in. "What is that? Not vitamins," I said coldly. "Not even close." His breath hitched. But she wouldn't. She did. My daughter's trembling confession echoed in my ears. She said it was candy, but it wasn't. The pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. Marlene had purchased something at dawn. She visited the clinic 15 minutes later. She checked my car. She tampered with my daughter's backpack, and she forced her to taste something that burned. "Why?" Eric whispered. "Why would she even ask her yourself?" I snapped. The mirror shard caught the light again, slicing a jagged reflection across the table. I stared into it, into the distorted version of myself, and felt a surge of fury rise like a pulse under my skin. My daughter's fear, the tremors, the lies. All of it had been woven into a careful web Marlene expected us to walk through blindly. Betrayal doesn't always come crashing down. Sometimes it walks in wearing familiar shoes and waits for you to look away. Eric sat down hard, burying his face in his hands. "We trusted her," he whispered. "I trusted her. She counted on that," I said quietly. I picked up the bank slip, examining the coded compound again. Something about the abbreviation nagged at me. I had seen a similar code during a case months ago, a medication that caused burning sensations, if improperly administered, especially if it touched the tongue. A medication absolutely not intended for children. My stomach clenched. "I think I know what she gave her," I said, or tried to. I didn't want to say it out loud. Not yet. Not until Keller confirmed. But the possibility alone made my skin crawl. As I stood there, the mirror shard slipped slightly in my grip, catching the dim lamplight and slicing a bright line across the document spread before me, pointing directly at the dried powder residue still clinging to the rim of the pill bottle. The reflection trembled. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a cold certainty settle into my bones. "She wanted access," I murmured. "She wanted control. She planned this." Eric didn't argue. He couldn't. My daughter whimpered in her sleep, and the sound jolted me like a physical strike. I turned instantly, heart-hammering, but she didn't wake. She just shifted beneath her blanket face, scrunched in discomfort. I knelt beside her bed, brushing her hair gently. "I'm here," I whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." When I stood again, Eric met my eyes with a look I had never seen in him before, fear mixed with dawning understanding. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We finish what we started," I said. "We take all of this to Keller. We let him connect the final pieces." The mirror shard glinted once more in my hand, a fractured reflection of the truth we now held. I placed it next to the pill bottle, aligning every piece of evidence in a single-line custody timeline: intent and harm. Everything pointed to one conclusion: one person, one betrayal. Some truths don't destroy relationships, they obliterate them, leaving nothing but shards sharp enough to cut. I gathered the documents, the bottle, the note, the phone, and the bank slip, sliding them carefully into my bag. When the last piece dropped inside the mirror, shard caught the hall light again, splitting the room into two jagged halves. It felt like a warning, or a promise. The evidence cornered her. Now I needed Keller to confirm the unthinkable. The clinic smelled sharper at night, as though the antiseptic had soaked deeper into the walls after the last of the daytime patients had gone home, and every overhead light seemed a little too bright against the quiet emptiness of the corridors. I pushed open the diagnostics wing door, my hand tightening around the cold doorknob, the metal biting into my palm with a chill that traveled up my arm. My daughter clung to my hip, half asleep, but restless, her small fingers twitching against my jacket. Eric followed behind us, silent, the weight of the truth finally beginning to anchor itself into his posture. Keller met us outside his office with an expression I had seen only a handful of times during my years in the ER, the kind of expression physicians wore when they were preparing to tell someone their life had just split into a before and after. "I ran the test," he said quietly. "The full panel." My pulse quickened. "And," he gestured toward his office. I stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind us, and the room's dim lamp cast long shadows across the walls, pooling into corners like waiting shapes. Keller sat at his desk, tapping the edge of a folder that looked too thin to hold anything good. "Panel M204, he said, sliding it toward me. Time 14:12. Evidence number 8. The truth drop. The final confirmation. My throat tightened as I opened the folder. Inside was a single-page summary, printed cleanly, clinically, mercilessly. Compounds detected traces of a controlled medication used only for specialized neurological procedures, one that should never be ingested by a child, one that caused burning sensations on the tongue if it touched the surface, one that could in higher doses cause tremors, nausea, respiratory changes, one that required a physician's clearance even for adults. My vision blurred for a moment. My hand trembled. "She gave her this," I whispered, my voice cracking. Keller shook his head. "Not in full dose, but the residue on the bottle matches the panel, the powder at the rim. Same compound. If she had ingested more—" He let the sentence die, but the meaning slammed into me with brutal clarity. My daughter pressed her face against my shoulder, sensing the shift, even half asleep. Eric staggered backward until he hit the wall, his breath ragged. Why would she do this?" he rasped. Keller rested his hands on the desk, fingers interlaced. "This medication isn't something you pick up by accident. She had access knowledge and based on everything you've shown me, intent." The room tilted. Not literally, but in that way reality tilts when something so horrific becomes undeniable. I thought of the faded ink note, the audio clip, the trembling, the timeline conflict, the bank slip, the powder residue. And now the test panel M204, proving that what my daughter tasted wasn't candy, wasn't harmless, wasn't even remotely safe. It was a controlled neurological compound. There are truths so dark, they don't just break you, they erase the person you were before you heard them. Keller leaned forward, his voice steady but weighted with urgency. "Emily, she placed your daughter in direct harm. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate." Each word hit harder than the last. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to collapse. Not now, not in front of my daughter. "What happens next?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. "We file a formal report tonight," he said, "with all 8 pieces of evidence documented, especially this." He tapped the panel, "and we make sure she doesn't get anywhere near your daughter again." Eric swallowed hard. I can't believe she did this." I turned toward him slowly, and something inside me, some old softness, some old loyalty finally snapped. "You believed her over your daughter?" I said, not shouting, but with a cold clarity that made him flinch. "You defended her while our child was terrified." His breath trembled. He didn't deny it. Keller stood and walked to the counter, retrieving the pill bottle sealed inside a sterile evidence bag. He set it gently in front of me. "This confirms everything he said, and it confirms she lied to you every step of the way." My daughter whimpered softly in her sleep against my shoulder, and the sound cut through me with surgical precision. I kissed her forehead, feeling my own tears slip silently down my cheek. Keller continued, "Emily, you need to prepare yourself. When we confront her with this, she may react unpredictably." I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. My hands felt steadier than they had all day. The cold doorknob, the fractured reflections, the trembling confession, all of it converged into a single, unshakable truth. "She's not touching my daughter again," I said. "Ever. Some betrayals don't simply reveal who someone is. They reveal who you must become to protect what you love." Keller nodded solemnly. "Then it's time. We take this forward." I shifted my daughter higher on my hip, grabbed the evidence bag and the folder, and headed for the door. My hand wrapped around the cold doorknob once more, but this time I didn't flinch. I held it with a resolve I hadn't felt until now. The truth was undeniable. Now I had to face her with it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at the dining table with the evidence spread around me in the same grim order I had laid it out earlier, the pill bottle sealed in its sterile bag. The faded ink note Amanda's video paused on the exact second Marlene slipped something into my daughter's backpack. The medical panel proving the residue was a controlled compound. The timeline screenshot placing her at the clinic before she ever admitted it. The bank slip linking her to the restricted pharmacy. The audio clip. Everything. When the sun finally rose in a weak gray wash, it felt less like morning and more like a warning. My daughter slept curled on the couch nearby, her breath soft, her hand resting against her cheek, and I knew I would burn the world down before letting anyone hurt her again. Keller had arranged the meeting for late morning neutral ground, he'd called it, though nothing about this confrontation felt neutral. Eric drove us in silence, his hands clenched around the steering wheel, the color gone from his face. He had spent the night pacing, repeating the same cracked words, "I didn't know. I didn't know." But regret didn't undo anything. It didn't soften what had already been done. It didn't erase the terror choking our daughter. The clinic's administrative room felt colder than the rest of the building, as though someone had drawn the blinds too tightly against the daylight. A stack of patient forms sat on the corner of the desk, and when I reached to move them aside, a sheet slipped out and sliced across my finger. A thin sting, a single bead of blood. The paper edge-cutting skin felt strangely symbolic, a reminder that even innocent things had the power to wound when handled at the wrong moment. Eric hissed, reaching for my hand, but I pulled back and pressed the small cut against my palm. "I'm fine," I said. I wasn't. Not in any sense that mattered. The door opened before I could gather myself. Marlene walked in with her usual measured grace, dressed immaculately, her hair pinned back with precise symmetry. She looked like she always did, serene, composed, unbothered. She did not look like a woman who had drugged a child. She did not look like a woman who had lied, manipulated, and orchestrated a day filled with terror. And that was the problem. She held her purse delicately in one hand and smiled at Eric first, that soft, infuriating curve of her lips she used to disarm people. "You called," she said lightly, as though invited for coffee. Her gaze slid to me. Cooler, sharper. "You sounded upset." My daughter whimpered from the corner of the room, not loudly, but loud enough. Marlene's eyes snapped toward her with a flicker so brief most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I saw the annoyance behind it, the calculation. Keller stepped into the room behind her, holding the folder with panel M204. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We have several concerns we need to address." The smallest tightening happened around her jaw. "Concerns," she echoed lightly. "About what?" Her voice was silk-covered steel. "About this," I said, laying out the evidence one piece at a time. The faded ink note, the bottle, the timeline screenshot, the bank slip, the panel test, Amanda's video. Each item landed with a soft rustle, and each rustle made my pulse hammer harder. Marlene stared at the collection with a curious expression, as though examining artifacts from someone else's disaster. "Emily," she said softly, almost pitying, "you've always been dramatic." I felt something dark and hot crawl up my spine. I stepped closer. "She told my daughter the medication would taste like candy." A flicker barely there crossed her expression. "Kids imagine things." "She also gave her enough residue to burn her tongue," Keller said sharply. The softness in Marlene's face evaporated. She tilted her head, calculating. "Residue," she repeated. "That's hardly a crime." "It is," Keller said, "when the residue belongs to a controlled neurological compound meant for adult sedation procedures." Her silence deepened. The coldest part was how she didn't deny it immediately. She just weighed her options, measured her lie, crafted her angle. Then she finally said, "You can't prove intent." I took a step forward, my hands trembling not with fear, but with something colder. "But I can prove harm." And then, because she didn't look shaken enough yet, I played Amanda's video. The instant the frame showed Marlene slipping something into the backpack, her mouth tightened. Not in fear, not in shame, in irritation. Irritation that she had been caught. Some people don't fear consequences, they resent being interrupted. "You don't know what I put in there," she snapped quietly. The mask cracked. Finally. It wasn't medication. It could have been anything. It wasn't anything I said. It was the same compound found at the rim of the bottle. You bought it, you checked the clinic, you touched her, you told her to be brave. My daughter whimpered again, hiding her face. I turned toward her, and the sound she made, the shivering breath she couldn't hold in, was more damning than any test, any evidence. When I looked back at Marlene, something inside me had hardened into something unbreakable. "You don't get to speak to her again," I said. "You don't get to look at her. You don't get near her. Ever." Marlene's lips curled into a narrow smile, a venomous, deliberate thing. "You think you can keep me away?" I stepped closer until I stood inches from her. "I don't think—" "I know." Keller handed me the official report form already printed with the evidence summary. When I took it, the paper brushed the small cut on my finger, burning slightly, but I didn't flinch. I signed my name. Each stroke of ink felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. Her composure faltered. The first real crack. Eric stepped between us, not to protect her, but to protect me from myself, from the rage radiating off me like heat. "It's over, Marlene," he said quietly. She stared at him, stunned that he wasn't choosing her side this time. Silence filled the room, thick and electric. Then Keller spoke, calm but final. "You need to leave. We'll be following up formally." Marlene inhaled sharp and offended, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked out with that same polished grace, but something in her posture had collapsed. I lifted my daughter into my arms, holding her tightly as the door clicked shut behind the woman who had fractured our lives. Justice doesn't always roar. It sometimes arrives as a steady, unshakable line you refuse to let anyone cross again. The confrontation was over, but the reflection still waited for us at home. The house is quiet when we return, the kind of late-night quiet that wraps itself around the walls like a heavy blanket, muting every sound except the soft rhythm of my daughter's breathing against my shoulder. I ease the door shut behind us and let the darkness settle before reaching for the switch that turns on the dim lamp in the living room. Its glow is low, warm, imperfect. Nothing harsh, nothing splitting the room into the jagged contrasts that have followed us all day. The light pools into the corners gently, leaving no sharp shadows for her to flinch at. I feel her body finally loosen the tension, slowly draining from her muscles as she looks around and realizes the house isn't hiding anything tonight. The evidence bag sits on the counter where I left it earlier. The pill bottle, now sealed inside, contained powerless. And for the first time in hours, her eyes don't dart toward it with panic. She looks up at me with a fragile exhaustion, one that makes my chest tighten, and I brush her hair back with a tenderness that steadies both of us. "You're safe," I whisper. "You're safe now." Her head rests against me, barely nodding, her breath slowing into a gentle drift of air across my collarbone. I hold her until the tremors ebb away. In the faint lamplight, the glass cabinet door catches a soft shimmer. Unlike the fractured reflections that haunted earlier moments, this one doesn't split or distort. It's steady calm. The reflection settles into one honest shape, and I feel something inside me settle with it finally, after a day carved by fear and betrayal. Eric steps into the doorway a moment later, his gaze lingering on us with hollow regret. I don't speak. I'm not ready to forgive, and he doesn't ask me to. He lowers his head and quietly moves toward the kitchen, giving us space. My daughter lifts her face, her voice a faint whisper. "Is she gone?" The question holds no accusation, no confusion, only the timid hope that the danger has passed. "Yes," I say softly. "She's gone. And she won't come back. Not near you. Not near us." Her shoulders relax. She curls closer, and in a gesture that breaks me in a way nothing else today has, she reaches for my hand, not out of fear this time, but trust. There is a moment after surviving something dark when you finally understand the strength it took to walk through it. I switch off the overhead lights, leaving only the dim lamp casting its soft halo across the room. The glow settles around us like a warm tide smoothing out the jagged edges of the day. No shadows stretch across the walls. No shapes twist into fear. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the delicate rise and fall of her breathing. I sit with her on the couch, feeling her body relax fully for the first time. Her fingers trace the seam of my sleeve, a slow, almost meditative motion, and her eyes finally begin to close. I hum softly an old lullaby my mother used to sing, letting the melody thread through the room. The tension that has lived in my chest for hours loosens, unwinding itself one breath at a time. Eventually, her eyelashes flutter shut, and I shift just enough to lay her head gently on the pillow beside me. She doesn't stir. Outside, the rain begins again, but it's a quiet rain, steady and unthreatening, a cleansing rhythm, a soft end to a hard day. I keep my hand resting lightly on her back, feeling each small breath she takes, as if confirming her presence all over again. The dim lamp flickers once, not like the harsh clinic lights, not like the ominous shifts of earlier, but like a tired candle settling into its last steady burn. I stand slowly, retrieving the evidence bag and placing it inside the locked drawer of my desk. Not to hide it, nothing about this day will ever be hidden again, but to give it a place where it can't cast any more shadows. When I return to the couch, I sit beside her again, watching her sleep. Her face is peaceful, unburdened, safe, and as I sit there, letting the quiet stretch, I feel something I haven't felt since the morning began: clarity, strength, resolve. The kind that doesn't need anger to sustain it. The kind that rises after the storm instead of during it. Sometimes survival is not loud. It's the quiet decision to keep protecting the light that remains. I glance once more at the cabinet glass, now holding only that single steady reflection. No fractures, no distortions, just the truth of this moment whole and unbroken. I exhale slowly, letting the last remnants of fear leave my body. Tonight the danger is gone. Tonight the shadows hold no secrets. Tonight the light is enough. And in the dim glow, our fractured world finally begins to mend.